I once pretended to be someone's boyfriend for a weekend. Not because I was bored, not because I had nothing better to do, but because a woman I'd been quietly watching for 4 months looked at me one evening in a hospital hallway, hands twisted together, voice barely above a whisper, and asked me to be her hometown boy. Her mother's peace of mind. Her one small lie made real for just 2 days. I said yes before I had any business saying yes. But I'm getting ahead of myself because before any of that, before Millhaven and Margaret's kitchen and the thing that almost didn't happen between us, there was a Tuesday morning and a job site accident and a shoulder that hurt a lot more than I was willing to admit. My name is Cole Rafferty. I'm 27 years old. I make my living as an electrician in Austin, Texas, pulling wire through old walls, fixing breaker panels, crawling through attics that smell like 50 years of dust and summer heat. My hands are rough. My boots are always dirty. By noon on any given workday, I smell like solder and dry concrete. It's not a glamorous life, but it's honest and it's mine, and most days that's enough. The morning everything changed. I was 3 floors up on a commercial renovation job off 6th Street when a section of subflooring gave way without warning. I didn't fall far, maybe 4 feet, but I landed hard on my right shoulder against the edge of a steel joist, and the sound it made when I hit was not a sound I wanted to hear again. My foreman took one look at the way I was holding my arm and told me I was done for the day. I argued. He won. Mercy General Hospital was 12 minutes from the job site. I drove myself, which my foreman said was stupid, and he was probably right. I sat in the emergency intake waiting room for 45 minutes with my shoulder wrapped in a bag of ice, from the cooler in my truck filling out paperwork with my left hand and being quietly irritated about the whole situation. Then a nurse came around the corner with a clipboard, called my name, and my irritation went somewhere I couldn't immediately locate. She was not what I expected. I don't know exactly what I expected from an emergency room nurse on a Tuesday morning, but it wasn't someone who moved through a loud, bright, busy hospital ward like she had all the time in the world. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't frantic. She just moved with this quiet, unhurried purpose that made the whole room feel like it had slowed down a little just for her. She had dark hair pulled back under her scrub cap. Her eyes were steady and a little tired in the way that told me she'd already been on her feet for hours before I showed up. She looked at my intake form, then looked at me, then looked at the way I was sitting. On a scale of 1 to 10, she said, "Pen already moving, and please don't say 3. I had been planning to say 3. 4, I said instead. She gave me a look that said she didn't believe me. "Right shoulder." "Yes, ma'am." She made a note. "I'm Nora. I'll be taking care of you this morning. The doctor will be in shortly, but I'm going to get your vitals first and take a look at that shoulder." She set the clipboard down and reached for the blood pressure cuff on the wall with the kind of efficiency that came from doing something 10,000 times. How did it happen? I told her about the subflooring. She listened without interrupting, which I appreciated. Most people started offering opinions about job site safety before I got to the end of the story. Nora just listened, noted what she needed to note, and moved on. The exam room was small. There was a chair in the corner and a paper-covered table and a window that looked out onto the hospital parking structure. Not much to look at, but I wasn't looking at the window. She was checking the range of motion in my shoulder, asking me to lift my arm, hold it, lower it, and the whole time she was watching my face instead of my arm. Reading the pain I wasn't saying out loud. "You've been ignoring this for a while," she said. It wasn't a question. "It's been a long week." She made another note. "I'm going to get you something for the pain before the doctor comes in. And I'm going to bring you a coffee from the cafeteria because you look like you haven't eaten anything today. And I need you to be able to answer questions without passing out." I almost smiled. "You do that for all your patients." "Only the stubborn ones." She was already moving toward the door. "How do you take it?" "Black, no sugar." She nodded once and was gone. She came back 8 minutes later with a paper cup of coffee that was objectively not very good. It was thin and a little burnt, and it had clearly been sitting in the carafe for longer than it should have. I drank the whole thing. While I drank it, she updated something on the tablet mounted to the wall, and I watched her work. And I thought about the fact that I could not remember the last time someone had just done something kind for me without being asked. The doctor came in 20 minutes later. Nothing was broken, badly bruised, possible minor ligament strain rest and anti-inflammatories, and a follow-up in a week. Nora came back to go over the discharge instructions. She handed me the paperwork and went through it item by item, clear and thorough, not rushing. At the bottom of the last page, I had to fill in my home address. Austin, I said, writing it out. East Side. How long have you been in Austin? She asked, not looking up from the tablet. 5 years, came up from Tennessee. She looked up. Something shifted in her expression, small but real. Tennessee? Millhaven, I said. You know it. The tablet lowered about 2 inches. I grew up there, she said. For a moment, neither of us said anything. The hospital hummed around us, carts, in the hallway voices, at the nurse's station, the soft mechanical rhythm of the building going about its business. But in that small exam room, something had just gotten very quiet. Small world, I said. She looked at me for another second. Then the corner of her mouth turned up small and a little surprised, like she hadn't expected to smile just then. Small world, she agreed. I left Mercy General an hour later with a sling, a prescription, and discharge paperwork I had already half forgotten. I sat in my truck in the parking structure for a few minutes before starting the engine. I told myself I was waiting for the pain medication to kick in. That was not entirely true. I told myself I kept coming back because the cafeteria coffee was decent. That was a lie. The coffee at Mercy General was not decent. It was thin and bitter, and it came out of a machine that made a sound like it was deeply unhappy about its situation. I drank it anyway. I drank it every Tuesday and Thursday for 4 months, sitting at a corner table by the window, waiting for a nurse named Nora Callahan to take her lunch break. The follow-up appointment was the easy excuse. My shoulder needed checking. The doctor wanted to see me back in a week. After that, I needed to return the paperwork I'd forgotten to sign. After that, I was in the neighborhood. After that, I stopped making excuses and just showed up, and somewhere along the way, Nora stopped looking surprised to see me and started leaving the chair across from her open. That was how it worked between us. No grand gestures, no dramatic declarations, just 2 people from the same small town in Tennessee eating bad cafeteria food in a big Texas hospital and talking about nothing important until it started to feel like the most important part of the day. She told me about growing up in Millhaven. I told her about leaving it. We discovered we had gone to the same high school 4 years apart, had eaten at the same diner on Main Street, had both learned to drive on the same long flat road out past the Hendersons' farm. We knew different versions of the same town, and comparing notes felt like finding a photograph of a place you thought only existed in your memory. She was easy to talk to in the way that rare people are the kind where silence didn't need filling and you didn't have to perform being interesting. You could just sit there, and that was enough. I paid attention, though, more than I let on. I noticed she always ordered the same thing, a turkey sandwich she ate exactly half of, and a cup of soup she finished completely. I noticed she kept a small notebook in her scrub pocket and wrote in it during slow moments, not patient notes. Something else, something personal, that she always turned face down when anyone walked past. I noticed she had a habit of tucking her pen behind her left ear and then forgetting it was there and looking for it everywhere before someone pointed it up. I noticed the way she laughed quietly, like she was trying not to take up too much space with it. I noticed a lot of things I had no particular right to notice. 4 months in, I knew she was studying for her medical school entrance exams on top of working full shifts. I knew she woke up at 5 every morning to get 2 hours of studying in before her shift started. I knew she was tired in a way that went deeper than sleep could fix, the kind of tired that comes from wanting something so badly for so long that the wanting itself becomes exhausting. I knew because I paid attention. And because one afternoon I came to the cafeteria early and found her already there, not eating, not studying, just sitting with her forehead resting on her folded arms on the table. I set my coffee down quietly. I sat across from her. I didn't say anything. After about a minute, she lifted her head, saw me, and had the grace not to be embarrassed. "Long night," she said. "You want to talk about it?" She thought about it. "No." She reached across the table and stole my coffee. "But thank you for asking." I let her have the coffee. I went and got another one. That was the afternoon I understood that whatever this was between us, this Tuesday and Thursday thing that neither of us had named it, had stopped being casual somewhere along the way without either of us noticing. The problem was I didn't know what to do with that. Nora was not someone I could be careless with. She was not someone you practiced on or kept around loosely or treated like something temporary. Everything about the way she moved through the world, the care she gave her patients, the discipline she brought to her studying, the way she listened when you talked like your words actually mattered. Everything said that she was someone who deserved to be treated with the same seriousness she brought to everything else. I was a $30 an hour electrician from Millhaven, Tennessee, eating bad coffee in a hospital cafeteria. I was not sure I was the right person for that job, so I stayed where I was. I showed up on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I let her steal my coffee when she needed to. I listened when she talked, and I tried not to let my face do anything that would make things complicated. It worked. For 4 months it worked. Then one evening in October, she sent me a text message that changed the arrangement. "Are you free tomorrow evening? I need to ask you something. In person." I read it 3 times, standing in my kitchen in my work clothes, still dusty from the job site. I typed back, "I'm free." "Same place." Her response came quickly. "Same place. 6 o'clock. And Cole, it's kind of a big ask, just so you know." I set my phone down on the counter. I looked at it for a moment. Then I went and took a shower and tried very hard not to think about what a woman like Nora Callahan might consider a big ask. I didn't sleep well that night. She was already there when I arrived. 6 o'clock, exactly same corner table by the window, same chair she always sat in. But everything else was different. She wasn't eating. She wasn't studying. She was just sitting there with both hands wrapped around a coffee cup. She wasn't drinking, turning it slowly in her palms, like she was trying to figure out how to start a sentence she'd been rehearsing all day. I sat down across from her. "Hey, hey." She looked up. Her eyes were steady, but there was something careful behind them. "Thanks for coming." "Of course," she nodded, looked back at her coffee cup, turned it once more. I waited. With Nora, waiting was always worth it. "Okay," she said finally. "I'm just going to say it because if I keep building up to it, I'm going to talk myself out of it." She took a breath. "My mom has been worrying about me. You know how she is, or I guess you don't, but she's the kind of woman who worries as a full-time occupation. She calls me every Sunday and asks if I'm eating, and if I'm sleeping, and if I have people around me." Nora paused. "A few months ago, I told her I did. Have people around me. Specifically, I told her I had been spending time with someone. A man. Someone she didn't need to worry about." Another pause, shorter this time. "A hometown boy." I kept my face neutral. It took some effort. "She was so relieved," Nora continued. "She stopped asking if I was lonely. She stopped suggesting I move back to Millhaven. She relaxed, and I realized how much her worrying had been weighing on me, and so She gestured vaguely with one hand. I kept not correcting her. "For how long?" "4 months." I nodded slowly. "So there is no hometown boy." "There is no hometown boy." She finally looked at me directly. Her chin was up the way it got when she was embarrassed but refusing to show it. "Except that there is actually a hometown boy. He just doesn't know he's been cast in the role yet." The cafeteria hummed around us. Somewhere behind me, a tray clattered against a table. The coffee machine made its unhappy sound. I looked at her across the table. This woman I had been showing up for every Tuesday and Thursday for 4 months, telling myself it was casual, telling myself it was nothing, telling myself I was just being a good friend to someone from back home. "You want me to come to Millhaven with you?" I said. "Just for the weekend." She said it quickly. "My mom has been asking me to come home, and I keep putting it off because I don't want to show up and have to explain why the hometown boy doesn't exist. If you came with me just for 2 days, she would meet you and she would stop worrying, and then I could just... She trailed off. I know it's a lot. I know it's a strange thing to ask. You can absolutely say no, and I promise it won't be weird. It was already a little weird, but not in the way she meant. Tell me about the story, I said. The one you've been telling her. She blinked. You want to know the cover story. If I'm going to do this right, I need to know the details. Something shifted in her expression. Not quite relief yet. Something more cautious than that, like she was still waiting for the part where I changed my mind. We met at the hospital. You came in as a patient and we got to talking and eventually figured out we were both from Millhaven. We've been spending time together for a few months. Nothing too serious, but good, comfortable. She paused. I told her you were kind. That's it. That's it. What's my job in this story? She almost smiled. Electrician. I didn't change that part. It felt like too much to keep track of. I leaned back in my chair and looked at her. She was watching me with that careful, steady expression, the one she used when she was reading a patient trying to figure out what they weren't saying. I thought about 4 months of Tuesday and Thursday lunches. I thought about the notebook she always turned face down. I thought about the morning I found her asleep on the table and I sat across from her and didn't say anything because somehow that felt like exactly the right thing to do. I thought about the fact that in 4 months she had never once mentioned a single detail about me to her mother that wasn't true, kind. She had told her mother I was kind. When do we leave? I said. She stared at me. You what? Millhaven. When do we leave? Cole. She set her coffee cup down. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. I leaned forward, elbows on the table. Nora, when do we leave? She looked at me for a long moment, long enough that I started to wonder if I'd misread something. Then she exhaled, slow and quiet, the way you breathe out when you've been holding something for longer than you realized. Next Friday, she said, if that works for you. It works. She nodded, looked down at the table. Then she looked back up and there was something in her face I hadn't quite seen before, something open and a little raw, like she'd taken a small risk and it had landed somewhere softer than she expected. Thank you, she said quietly. Don't thank me yet, I said. You haven't seen me try to make small talk with someone's mother. She laughed, really laughed sudden and unguarded, the kind she usually kept small. It filled up the corner of the cafeteria for just a moment before she caught it and brought it back. I picked up my coffee and tried to look like a man who was merely doing a friend a favor. I was not doing a very convincing job of it, but she didn't seem to notice. We spent the next hour going over details, how we'd met, how long we'd been spending time together, what we liked about each other. I answered every question without hesitating. I already knew her coffee order and her study schedule and the way she laughed when she thought no one important was watching. She wrote some of it down in that small notebook of hers. At one point she looked up and said, "You know an unsettling amount of detail about me, Cole." "Good memory," I said. She looked at me for a beat too long. "Is that what it is?" I didn't answer that. I just asked what time she wanted to leave on Friday. She let me change the subject, but I noticed she was smiling when she wrote down the answer. 800 miles is a long way to go to tell a lie. It's also a long way to go with someone you're trying very hard not to have feelings for. I picked her up at 7 in the morning. She was already outside her building when I pulled up, weekend bag over one shoulder, 2 coffees from the cart down the street in her hands. She passed one through the window before I'd even put the truck in park. Black, no sugar. I took it without saying anything. She climbed in. We pulled out onto the street in a quiet that felt too comfortable for 2 people who were supposed to be pretending. The first 2 hours, we talked about practical things, the route, where to stop, how long it would take. After San Antonio, the conversation slowed and drifted the way long drives make conversations drift easy and unhurried, following whatever came up naturally. She asked when I'd left Millhaven. 19, I said. Trade school in Nashville first, then Memphis, then Austin. Do you miss it? I thought about it honestly. I miss what it was when I was a kid. I'm not sure that version still exists. She looked out the passenger window. Parts of it do. A pause. My mom's kitchen still smells the same, like coffee and something baking even when nothing's in the oven. How long since you've been back? She didn't answer right away. 8 months, she said finally, flat and careful like a number she'd been trying not to think about. I didn't push, but I filed it away. We stopped for gas somewhere in central Tennessee as the afternoon light turned gold. Nora got out and stood beside the truck with her face tipped up toward the sky, eyes closed. The air smelled different here than Austin. Cooler, greener, the particular smell of Tennessee in October that I had forgotten I missed until right now. You feel that, she said, eyes still closed. Yeah, I forgot it smelled like this. I watched her stand there in the fading afternoon light and made myself look back at the gas pump before my face did something I couldn't explain away. Back on the road, the light started failing. The hills got bigger. The trees pressed closer to the highway, and the radio found a station playing something slow and country that neither of us changed. Nora pulled a blanket from her bag and tucked it around her legs. Somewhere around 90 minutes outside Millhaven, she fell asleep. I knew because her breathing changed. Her head tipped slowly toward the window and stayed there. I drove. The Tennessee dark came down easy and full the way it does in October. The headlights cut through the trees on roads I remembered from childhood. I thought about the cover story we had practiced. We met at the hospital. We figured out we were from the same town. We'd been spending time together. All of it true, every word. The only thing we hadn't practiced was what to call it. An hour outside Millhaven, I passed the exit for the long, flat road where we'd both learned to drive years apart. I almost said something. Then I didn't. It felt like too much to say in the dark with her asleep. Then the sign appeared in my headlights. Welcome to Millhaven, Tennessee. Population 8,200. I slowed without meaning to. Beside me, Nora stirred. She lifted her head, blinked, and looked out the window. Then she saw the sign, and something in her face went very still and very open. At the same time, the look of someone seeing something they'd been pretending they didn't miss. She turned and looked at me, hair loose from the window blanket still on her shoulders, eyes soft with sleep. We're home, she said quietly. 2 words, simple and easy like they applied to both of us equally. They sat in my chest in a way I couldn't shake. I drove us into Millhaven without saying anything back. Main Street was quiet, storefronts dark behind their windows. We passed the high school, the church with the broken letter on its sign that still hadn't been fixed after all these years. Nora directed me through older neighborhoods until she pointed at a white frame house on a corner porch light on yellow light in the windows. I pulled up in front and cut the engine. Neither of us moved for a moment. Ready, she said. I looked at the house, porch light, a woman inside who believed her daughter had someone to lean on. Ready, I said. She reached for her bag, then stopped and looked at me. In the dark of the truck cab with the porch light across her face, she looked tired and grateful and more like herself than I had ever seen her look under fluorescent hospital lights. Thank you, she said. For real. Don't thank me yet, I said. You haven't seen me try to make small talk with your mother. She laughed sudden and unguarded. Then she got out, and I followed her up the porch steps, and somewhere between the truck and the front door, I stopped thinking about cover stories entirely. None of this felt like pretending, and that was the part I didn't know what to do with. Margaret Callahan opened the door before we reached the top step. She was a small woman with Nora's dark hair gone mostly silver and the kind of face that had been pretty for so long it had become something better. She looked at Nora first, a quick inventory the way mothers do, making sure everything is where it's supposed to be. Then she looked at me. The look was thorough. Boots, hands, shoulders. Some conclusion reached before I opened my mouth, then she smiled, wide and warm and without reservation. You look like you could use a real meal, son. Yes, ma'am, I said, I believe I do. She had made dinner. Not a small dinner, roast chicken and biscuits and green beans, cooked the Southern way, and a pecan pie on the counter that smelled like every good memory I had of being a child in Tennessee. She moved around her kitchen with the ease of someone who had made this particular meal 1,000 times, talking while she worked, filling the room with a warm, steady stream of news about the neighborhood and who had come back to town and what had happened to the hardware store on 5th and Main. I listened. I set forks on the left side of plates and knives on the right, and I listened to everything. "Nora tells me you grew up here," she said without looking up. "Yes, ma'am, over on Birchwood. Left when I was 19. You know the Pattersons, they were on Birchwood. David Patterson was in my grade." She looked up, then pleased. "His mother is in my book club." She shook her head slowly. "Small world." "That's what Nora said," I told her, when we figured out we were both from here. Margaret smiled at the pot she was stirring. I imagine that was a nice thing to find. Someone from home in a city that size. "It was," I said. "That part required no acting at all." We sat down to dinner, and it was one of the best meals I had eaten in years. Not only because of the food, though the food was remarkable, but because of the table itself. Because of the way Nora unwound the longer we sat there, the tension she carried in her shoulders in Austin, slowly releasing her laugh, coming easier, her voice softening back into the slight Tennessee vowels she kept clipped at work. She looked like herself here in a way that made me realize I had only ever seen her look like a version of herself. Margaret asked me questions, careful ones that seemed casual but weren't. How long in Austin? Did I have family nearby? What had brought me into Mercy General that morning? I answered honestly. I told her about the job site and the shoulder and Nora looking at my pain scale number like she didn't believe it. Margaret laughed. Nora looked at the table. "She's always been like that," Margaret said, "even as a child. She could tell when someone wasn't being straight with her." She looked at Nora with quiet pride. "It's part of what makes her good at what she does." "Mom," Nora said, "I'm allowed to say true things." Margaret reached over and touched her daughter's hand briefly. Then she looked at me. "She works too hard. I'm sure you know that." "I do," I said, "and she doesn't ask for help." "I know that too." Nora looked at me across the table. Something moved quickly through her expression and was gone. Margaret stood to cut the pie, and Nora stayed at the table across from me. The kitchen was warm. Outside the window, Mill Haven was dark and quiet. "You doing okay?" Nora asked, low enough that her mother wouldn't hear. "More than okay," I said. She studied me a moment, deciding if I meant it. I meant it. Margaret came back with pie, and we sat another hour. She told me about Nora at 8 years old, reorganizing the school library because she thought the filing system was inefficient. About the summer Nora decided to become a marine biologist. About the way she cried at the end of every school year because she would miss her teachers. I stored every word. When I was shown to the guest room, I lay in the dark and thought about a little girl reorganizing a library. I thought about Margaret's hand on Nora's hand. I thought about the weight of this house, the specific gravity of a home that had been filled with love for a long time. I wanted to deserve being inside it. I was almost asleep when I made a decision. Tomorrow morning I would wake early the way I always did and walk down to find coffee before the house was up. I needed the air. I needed the quiet. I needed 20 minutes alone to remember what this weekend was and what it wasn't. What I did not need was to see what I saw when I walked into the diner on Main Street the next morning. But that's the thing about small towns. They don't ask what you need. They just show you what's true. I saw him before Nora did. That was the only advantage I had. The diner on Main Street opened at 6:30. I got there just after when the place was still mostly empty, a couple of older men at the counter with newspapers, a waitress refilling coffee without being asked, the particular quiet of a small-town morning that hasn't fully decided to start yet. I ordered a coffee to go and stood by the window while I waited. That was when I saw them. Corner booth toward the back. A man I didn't recognize at first, mid-30s, good-looking in the way that required some effort, the kind of haircut that didn't happen in Mill Haven. He was leaning across the table toward a woman with light hair, saying something that made her laugh. His hand was over hers on the tabletop. Comfortable, familiar, the body language of two people who had been together long enough to stop performing it. The waitress set my coffee on the counter. I picked it up. I was almost at the door when the man shifted in the booth and I saw his face straight on. I didn't know him, but something about the way he carried himself easy and a little too aware of the room stuck with me as I walked back to the house. I found out who he was 3 hours later. Nora and I had walked into town after lunch the way she used to do on weekends growing up, she said. Main Street on a Saturday afternoon in October, the farmer's market was setting up. Somebody's dog was loose near the flower stand. 2 women from Margaret's church stopped us to say hello and looked at me with the particular interest of people who had heard there was someone and were now forming opinions. I shook hands and answered questions and said yes, ma'am, at the appropriate moments. Nora stood beside me with her shoulder just touching mine, and it felt so natural I had to remind myself why we were there. We were near the end of the block when I heard his voice. "Nora!" She stopped. Her shoulder left mine. I turned. It was the man from the diner. Up close, he was taller than he'd looked in the booth, dressed like he wanted people to notice, without seeming like he wanted people to notice. He was looking at Nora with an expression I recognized immediately, the expression of someone who had made a decision they now thought was negotiable. "Brett," she said. Her voice was steady. Nothing else about her was. He smiled like the name in her mouth was a welcome sign. "I didn't know you were coming home this weekend." His eyes moved to me briefly, a quick assessment, no warmth in it. "Who's this?" "Cole Rafferty," I said. I didn't wait for Nora to answer. "I'm with Nora." His eyes came back to me, held for a moment. "Brett Harlow," he said. "Old friend." He said it the way people say things they know aren't quite accurate, but are counting on no one to challenge. He turned back to Nora. Something shifted in his manner, smoother, more deliberate, like he'd decided to stop acknowledging I was there. He said he'd been thinking about her. He said he'd been meaning to reach out. He said things had changed, and he wasn't sure she knew that. Nora was very still beside me. I let him talk for about 30 seconds. Then I took out my phone. I pulled up the photo I had noticed without meaning to notice in the diner that morning. I hadn't taken it intentionally, had just been checking a work message when my camera had already been open and I'd caught the frame without thinking. The corner booth, his hand over hers, the easy familiarity that doesn't come from being over someone. I didn't say anything. I just turned the screen toward Nora so she could see it. She looked at the photo. Then she looked at Brett. Brett's expression didn't change right away. Then it did. At exactly that moment, somewhere behind us, a phone rang. Brett's hand went to his pocket reflex before he could stop it. He looked at the screen. Something moved across his face. He pressed decline. But not before I saw the name. Not before Nora saw it. Cass Lover. The 3 of us stood on the sidewalk in the October afternoon and nobody said anything for a moment. Then, from somewhere near the flower stand, maybe 15 feet away, a woman stood up from the bench where she'd been sitting with 2 other people. Light hair. The woman from the diner booth. She had been there the whole time. She had heard his voice. She had watched him walk toward us. She came over slowly. She looked at Brett. She looked at the phone in his hand with her name on the screen. She looked at Nora. She put together what she was seeing with the quiet efficiency of someone who had been half expecting something like this for longer than she wanted to admit. Then she reached into her jacket pocket, took out a single key on a plain ring and set it on the wooden railing of the nearest storefront. She looked at Brett one last time. Her face was very calm. "I gave you 2 years," she said. "Don't call me." She walked away. She didn't look back. Brett stood there with his phone still in his hand and the key on the railing and the particular expression of a man watching 2 things end at once. I put my phone back in my pocket. I placed my hand lightly on Nora's back. "Come on," I said quietly. She came. We walked back the way we had come and neither of us spoke for a full block. Her steps were steady, but I could feel the slight tension running through her. After a while, she said, "You took that photo this morning." "It was an accident," I said. "My camera was already open." She glanced at me sideways. "Was it I kept walking. How do you feel? She was quiet for a moment, then, I don't know yet. Another pause. How are you? Fine, I said. That was not entirely true, but it was true enough for a Saturday afternoon in Millhaven, with someone else's key still sitting on a railing behind us. We didn't talk about it at dinner. Margaret noticed something was different. She noticed everything I was learning, but she didn't ask. She put more food on the table and kept the conversation moving and gave Nora the gift of a meal where nothing was required of her except to eat and be home. After dinner, Nora said she needed some air. I followed her out without being asked. The porch ran the length of the front of the house. There was an old wooden bench along the railing that had been there long enough to settle permanently into the boards. Nora sat at one end and pulled her knees to her chest. I sat at the other end and looked out at the quiet street. Millhaven at night was the kind of dark you forgot existed when you lived in a city. No ambient glow, no distant traffic, just the dark and the stars and the sound of something moving in the trees at the edge of the yard. She started talking after a while, like she'd been holding it in all day and the night was finally quiet enough to let it out. He left because I chose to keep studying, she said. She wasn't looking at me, she was looking at the street. We'd been together almost 3 years. He wanted me to stay in Millhaven, get a local nursing job, something steady. She stopped. He said I was chasing something that wasn't practical, that I should be realistic about who I was. I kept quiet. And the worst part, she said, is that for a long time after he left, I wondered if he was right. Not about staying, but about me. About whether I actually had what it takes, or whether I was just someone very good at working hard and fooling herself. The trees moved at the edge of the yard. The stars were very bright. That's not the same thing, I said. Working hard and fooling yourself. I know that now. She pulled her knees tighter. It took a while. I looked at the side of her face, the porch light catching the line of her jaw, the tired set of her eyes. Nora, she turned. The people worth keeping, I said. Don't ask you to shrink yourself to fit their world. She looked at me for a long moment. Something moved through her expression, slow and quiet. I just needed to hear someone say that, she said softly. We were quiet for a while after that. The night settled around us. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked once and went quiet. Then she turned toward me. Can I ask you something? Yeah. This morning, the photo. Her eyes were steady on mine. Your camera was already open. Does it matter? It might. I thought about how to answer that. I thought about the 30 seconds I had stood at the diner window watching Brett's hand over Cass's hand, and the particular feeling that had come with it when I understood what I was looking at. I saw them together this morning, I said, before I knew who he was. When he walked up to you this afternoon, I recognized him. I paused, and I knew exactly what he was doing. How did you know? Because I know how a man looks at a woman he thinks he can still have. I said it flat and direct. And I didn't like it. She held my eyes. Why not? Here it was, the moment I had been stepping around for 4 months. I turned to face her fully on the bench. Because I'm in love with you, Nora. I said it clearly. No hesitation, no softening. I've been in love with you for a long time. Probably since that first morning in the exam room when you handed me terrible coffee and looked at me like you already knew I was lying about my pain level. I stopped. Let that land. I didn't say anything because I didn't want to make your life harder. You had enough to carry. And I told myself that being your friend, showing up on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and being the person you could count on was enough. I looked at her. It stopped being enough a while ago. Nora stared at me. The porch was very quiet. Cole, she said. You don't have to say anything back, I said. I'm done not saying it. Whatever you do with it is up to you. She shook her head slowly, not disagreeing, more like she was clearing something out of the way. I'm in love with you too, she said, direct and clear the way she did everything. I've been trying not to be for months because I didn't know if you felt the same way, and I didn't want to lose what we already had. She let out a short breath. And then you drove 800 miles and sat at my mother's dinner table and looked at her like every word she said about me was the most important thing you'd ever heard. And I thought, I cannot keep pretending this is nothing. I looked at her. She looked at me. So, she said, what do we do now? I reached over and took her hand. Not dramatically. Just took it, held it, the way you hold something you've been careful with for a long time and have finally decided to stop being so careful about. Now, I said, we stop pretending. She looked down at our hands. Then she looked up at me and smiled. Really smiled, the full one she usually kept small, and it was the best thing I had seen in a very long time. We sat on that bench for another hour, talking. Not about anything important, just talking the way people do when they've stopped performing and started being. Her hand stayed in mine. The stars stayed over Millhaven, and somewhere inside the house, Margaret's television went quiet, and the lights went off one by one. I thought we were finally moving towards something real. I had no idea what was coming next. The drive back to Austin was different from the drive out. Same road, same 800 miles. Same truck with the same coffee stains on the center console. But everything inside the cab had shifted in a way that was impossible to ignore, and neither of us tried to. She sat in the passenger seat with her feet tucked up under her the same way she had on the way out. But this time, when she fell asleep somewhere in central Tennessee, her head tipped toward me instead of the window. I didn't move. I drove with one hand on the wheel and let her sleep and thought about what she had said on that porch bench. I've been trying not to be for months. I thought about all the Tuesdays and Thursdays, all the coffee, all the careful, deliberate distance I had kept, convinced I was being respectful, convinced I was protecting something. I thought about how much time two people can spend not saying a thing that both of them already know. She woke up outside San Antonio, sat up straight, and looked at me like she was checking to make sure I was still there. "Still here," I said, before she could ask. She smiled, looked out the windshield at the highway ahead of us. Good. That was all. But it was enough. The weeks after Millhaven were the best weeks I could remember in a long time. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that would have looked like much from the outside. We still met in the cafeteria on Tuesdays and Thursdays, but now I sat on the same side of the table instead of across from it. We walked to her car after her shifts. I waited outside the hospital on the night she studied late and drove her home because she was too tired to be behind a wheel. One night I came by her apartment and found her asleep at the kitchen table, textbooks open around her highlighter still in her hand. I made enough noise to let her pretend she hadn't been asleep. I made her tea. She drank it without saying much, and I sat across from her and watched her try to focus and thought I would do this every night for the rest of my life if she would let me. I didn't say that out loud, but I thought it. I should have paid more attention to what was coming. Looking back, the signs were there, but I was too busy being happy to read them correctly. The call from Denver came on a Wednesday morning. A contractor I had worked with 3 years earlier, big commercial project, 8 months minimum lead electrician position, more money than I had made in any single year since I started in the trade. The kind of opportunity that didn't come twice. I told him I'd think about it. I hung up and sat in my truck outside a job site and thought about it for approximately 45 seconds before deciding I was going to turn it down. I didn't tell Nora that evening. I told myself I was waiting for the right moment. The truth was, I didn't want to have the conversation, didn't want her to feel like she was. The reason I was saying no, didn't want to put that kind of weight on something that was still new and careful and good. I should have told her immediately. Instead, I mentioned it to Rex on a job site 2 days later, standing outside during a lunch break, and Rex, who had a loud voice and no concept of discretion, apparently mentioned it to a nurse he'd been seeing who worked on the same floor as Simone, who was Nora's closest friend at the hospital. I didn't know any of that, not then. What I knew was that on Friday afternoon I got a text from Nora saying she was taking a late break and asking if I wanted to come by the cafeteria. I said yes. I parked and walked through the main entrance and turned down the hallway toward the cafeteria the way I had done 100 times. I stopped at the doorway. Nora was at our table, but she wasn't alone. There was a man across from her, one of the residents I had seen around the floor before, a young, easy smile, leaning forward in his chair with the particular body language of someone who was enjoying the conversation very much. Nora was laughing at something he'd said, not her small, careful laugh, the real one. I stood in the doorway for a long moment. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself she was allowed to laugh with whoever she wanted to laugh with. I told myself I was being irrational. I also told myself that this was the third time I had seen them talk in 2 weeks, and that I was not imagining the way he looked at her. I left before she saw me. I walked back to my truck and sat in the parking structure in the dark for a long time. I picked up my phone, stared at Denver's number, put it down, picked it up again. I thought about what I had seen. I thought about the real laugh. I thought about the fact that Nora was extraordinary in every possible way, and that extraordinary people attracted extraordinary attention, and that I was a $30 an hour electrician from Millhaven who had somehow convinced himself this was going to work. I thought about all of that for a very long time. Then I called Denver back. "I'll take it," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt, which was good, because inside the truck in the dark of the parking structure, I felt like I had just made a decision I was going to spend a long time trying to unmake. I drove home. I did not stop at the hospital. I did not text Nora. She texted me that night. "Where did you go? I thought you were coming by." I stared at the message for a long time. Something came up. I wrote back, "Talk tomorrow." I set the phone face down on the counter and stood in my kitchen in the dark and tried to figure out how I had gotten here from that porch bench in Millhaven to this in less than 3 weeks. I didn't sleep much that night, but I had made my decision. What I didn't know, what I wouldn't find out until much later, was that Nora had seen me. She had seen me standing in the cafeteria doorway. She had watched me turn and walk away. And she had understood exactly what I thought I had seen and had let me believe it, because she had put it there for me to see. Denver was everything they had promised. Big project, serious money, a crew that knew what they were doing, the kind of commercial build that made everything I had been doing in Austin look like warm-up work. My foreman out there was a 20-year veteran named Sal who didn't waste words and respected people who didn't waste them either. The work was good. The pay was better. Every single day I wished I was somewhere else. I rented a room from a guy Rex knew clean, cheap, close to the site. The building smelled like fresh paint in someone else's life. I bought groceries I barely touched. I came home after 12-hour days and sat on the edge of the bed with my phone in my hand and stared at Nora's name in my contacts. I didn't call. I didn't text. I told myself it was cleaner this way. I told myself she was fine, better than fine, probably without the complication of whatever we had been trying to build. I told myself the man in the cafeteria was probably good for her, steady, available, not about to take a job 800 miles away. I told myself all of that every night for 2 weeks and believed approximately none of it. The third week, Rex called on a video call and took one look at my face. "Man," he said, "you look like hell." "Long days," I said. "Sure." He was quiet for a moment. "Is this about the nurse?" I didn't answer. "Cole." "What?" "Is this about the nurse?" I set the phone down on the nightstand and looked at the ceiling. "I saw her with someone," I said, "at the hospital, before I left." "Okay." And she was laughing. The real laugh. The one she doesn't. I stopped. I just figured I had been reading things wrong. Rex was quiet for long enough that I looked back at the phone. He was looking at me with an expression I didn't like. "What?" I said. "Nothing," he said. "I just think you're an idiot." "Thanks, Rex. I mean it in the best possible way." He hung up shortly after, and I lay in the dark in that room that smelled like someone else's life and thought about Millhaven. I thought about the bench. I thought about her hand in mine. I thought about "I've been trying not to be for months," and I thought about the way she had said it, direct and clear, the way she did everything. I thought about the fact that a woman like Nora Callahan did not say things she didn't mean. I was still thinking about it at 6 in the morning on a Saturday when my phone rang. Unknown number, Tennessee area code. I almost didn't pick up, then I did. "Cole?" The voice was warm and unhurried. "This is Margaret, Nora's mother." I sat up straight. "Margaret, is everything okay? Is Nora?" "She's fine," she said. "Physically, she's fine." A pause. "That's not exactly why I'm calling." I waited. "I'm not going to pretend I know everything that happened between you two," she said. "Nora doesn't tell me as much as she thinks she does and more than she intends to. But I raised that girl for 26 years, and I know when something is wrong with her." Her voice stayed calm and steady. "She's not sleeping. She's not eating right. She called me last Tuesday at 2 in the morning just to hear my voice and then spent the whole call telling me everything was fine." I closed my eyes. "I'm not calling to tell you what to do," Margaret said. "You're a grown man and that's not my place. But I do want to ask you one thing." She paused. "Just long enough. Did you mean it, any of it?" The room was very quiet. I thought about the porch bench, the stars over Millhaven, her hand, her voice saying me neither. "Yes, ma'am," I said. My voice came out rough, all of it. Margaret was quiet for a moment. "That's all I needed to know, sweetheart," she said gently. And she hung up. I sat on the edge of the bed in Denver with the phone still in my hand and the morning light coming through the gap in the curtains, and I thought about a woman who called her mother at 2 in the morning and spent the whole call saying she was fine. I thought about 800 miles. I thought about 12-hour days and a crew that respected me and the best-paying job I had ever had. Then I opened my laptop and looked up flights to Nashville. The earliest one left in 4 hours. I texted Sal family situation. "Need a few days, back by Wednesday." I didn't pack much, I didn't need much, I just needed to get on a plane and get to Millhaven before I talked myself out of it again. Because Margaret had asked me one question, and my answer to that question made everything else very simple. I had meant it, all of it, and it was time to stop acting like I hadn't. Margaret opened the door before I knocked. She stood in the doorway the same way she had the first time, small and straight, taking me in from boots to face in one sweep. This time she didn't smile right away. She just looked at me for a moment with those quiet eyes that saw too much. Then she stepped back and opened the door wider. "I'll put on some coffee," she said. I sat at her kitchen table and told her everything, all of it. From the first Tuesday in the cafeteria to the porch bench to the night I stood in the cafeteria doorway and let myself believe something that wasn't true. I told her the whole thing was supposed to be pretend, that I had come to Millhaven the first time as a favor, that nothing about it had felt like a favor from approximately the first 5 minutes. Margaret listened without interrupting. She refilled my coffee once without asking. When I finished, she sat with both hands around her mug and looked at the table. Then she looked up. "And now, is any of it still pretend?" "No, ma'am," I said. "Not for a long time." She nodded slowly. Then she stood, picked up her phone, typed something short, and set it face down on the counter. "I told her to come to the hospital tomorrow morning," she said. "Early. Told her I needed her to check on something for me." I looked at her. "The hospital." She met my eyes with the particular expression of a woman who had been doing right by her daughter for 26 years and had no intention of stopping. "That's where it started," she said. "That's where it should end, too." I drove to Austin that evening. On the way into the city, I stopped at a grocery store, the kind with flower buckets near the entrance. I stood in front of them for a moment. Roses felt wrong, too rehearsed, too much like something from a movie. Then I saw the sunflowers. Nora had mentioned them once months ago, a Tuesday in the cafeteria. Something about how she liked them because they always turned toward the light no matter what. She'd said it offhandedly, the way she said things that mattered without meaning to flag them. I had filed it away the way I filed everything she said. I bought the sunflowers. I bought 2 coffees from the cart outside the hospital the next morning, 1 black, no sugar, 1 with cream, and walked into Mercy General at 6:45 and stood in the hallway on the first floor. the exact spot where she had come around the corner with a clipboard and told me not to say 3. I stood there with sunflowers in one hand and 2 coffees in the other, and I waited. The morning shift started around me, nurses, residents, orderlies with carts. Nobody paid me much attention. I just stood there. At 7:10, I heard her footsteps before I saw her. I knew them, the specific rhythm, the quiet purpose. They came around the corner, and then she was there in her scrubs bag on one shoulder, looking at her phone. She looked up. She stopped. The bag slid off her shoulder. She caught it without looking at it, eyes fixed on me. I didn't move. I just stood there with everything I should have said 3 weeks ago sitting right on the surface. Not buried anymore, not careful. "Cole," she said. Her voice came out smaller than usual. "I know I should have called," I said. "I know I left without explaining anything, and I know you probably have things to say about that, and I will listen to all of it. But first, I need to say something." She didn't move. Her eyes were very bright. "I saw you in the cafeteria 3 weeks ago," I said, "with the resident, and I told myself I had been wrong about everything about Millhaven and the bench and what you said. I believed it because it was easier than believing the alternative." "What was the alternative?" she asked quietly. "That I was scared," I said. "That I had the best thing I had ever had, and I was so afraid of losing it that I walked away before it could be taken." I stopped. "That was the stupidest thing I have ever done." The corner of her mouth moved, not quite a smile. "I am in love with you," I said. "I told you that on your mother's porch, and I meant it then and I mean it now, and I am done letting fear make decisions for me." I held out the coffee with cream. "I also remember how you take your coffee, in case that matters." She looked at the coffee, she looked at the sunflowers, she looked at me. "You bought sunflowers," she said. "You said they always turn toward the light." "I said that once, months ago. I remember everything you have ever told me, Nora." She crossed the distance between us, and I opened my arms and she walked into them. I held her there in the middle of the hallway with the sunflowers pressed between us, and the 2 coffees somehow still upright, and the morning shift moving around us like water around 2 people who had finally stopped moving. She pulled back just enough to look at me. "I set it up," she said. "The cafeteria. The resident. I knew you were going to turn down Denver because of me, and I could not let you do that." "I know," I said. She blinked. "You know? I figured it out somewhere over Kansas. You do not laugh like that with people you just met. You laughed like that at me for the first time after about 3 months." She stared at me. Then she laughed the real one, sudden and unguarded, right there in the middle of the hallway. "I love you," she said. "You absolute idiot." "I love you too," I said. "Let us not do this again." "Agreed," she said. She took her coffee. I kept the sunflowers. We stood in that hallway for another minute, not going anywhere, not needing to. This was where it had started. An exam room and a bad pain scale number and a cup of terrible cafeteria coffee offered like a peace treaty. It seemed right that it ended here too, except it was not an ending at all. 6 months later, Nora got the letter. I was in her kitchen making coffee when she came out of the bedroom holding an envelope with the Mercy General Residency Program letterhead on it. She stood in the middle of the kitchen in her pajamas and looked at it for a long moment without opening it. "You want me to leave?" I asked. "No," she said immediately. "Stay." She opened it. Read it again." Then she looked up at me and her eyes were full and her face was doing something it didn't do very often, completely unguarded, completely uncontrolled, every wall down at once. "I got in," she said. I crossed the kitchen in 4 steps and picked her up, and she laughed and cried at the same time, arms around my neck, letter still in her hand. I drove her to Mercy General that morning. We walked in through the main entrance past the hallway where I had stood with sunflowers and bad coffee and everything I should have said sooner, and she went to find her supervising doctor, and I stood in the lobby and thought about a Tuesday morning 18 months ago when I had walked through these same doors with a busted shoulder and no expectations. I thought about how much can change from one ordinary morning to the next. I thought about Margaret in her kitchen in Millhaven waiting for the call she knew was coming. I thought about a porch bench and a Tennessee night and two people who had spent 4 months finding elaborate ways to avoid saying the obvious thing. Some things are worth saying out loud. Some things are worth driving 800 miles for. Some things are worth standing in a hospital hallway at 6:45 in the morning with sunflowers and 2 coffees and your whole heart on the surface. Nora Callahan taught me that. And if you have someone in your life who makes the obvious thing feel that important, say it. Don't wait. Don't let fear make the decision for you. Say it while you're standing in the hallway. Say it before you get on the plane. Say it on the porch in the dark with the stars over Millhaven and her hand in yours. Just say it. And if this story meant something to you, if it reminded you of someone or something you have been waiting to say, leave it in the comments below. I would love to hear it.